music does seem to affect people emotionally. I've had a couple of experiences of people coming up to me after kind of having cried in performance. And that's really touching. In many ways, my music is more approachable than, I guess, more avant-garde stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really often based on story. And it seems like people can follow it and they can tune in. Even if I'm singing in a language they don't understand, they seem to follow along.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I really enjoy working with soloists because that is the most direct connection of, as I mentioned, you've made this thing and you give it to someone else and then they put it through their body. I feel like, with the soloist, that's like the most intense. It's just you and this other person. Mm-hmm. The bigger the group, the more it kind of diffuses through the group, and then you get players who are kind of just there making a living and are just playing the notes in front of them. So for me, it's like the smaller the ensemble, the more meaningful it tends to be in that way. I love making opera. I've been really lucky. The last opera I did went through extensive workshopping multiple times with different people, and I just love being in that room trying out scenes and discussing the impact on the different levels. There's the text, that's how the text is set, the music, the movements, and you polish it just bit by bit, over and over. You make tweaks, and it's just a really invigorating experience, and it's fun. It's there's a physicality to it I really appreciate that. I think I'm a fairly social person. I like being in the room with other people, so I'm definitely not a hermit composer. I would never compose into a drawer. I just wouldn't compose. I need specific deadlines and specific performances with specific people.
Yeah.
That's how things get done. Otherwise, they wouldn't get done.
Yeah. And what is this project that you're referring to? The opera that has been workshopped extensively?
It's my opera Plaything that I wrote with my sister Reva, who's a writer. We won the Mecenas Musica Music to FM prize in 2020 for it, and that's a prize for female identifying composer librettist teams to develop an opera. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we went through a 2.5 year development process for this piece. It's about 55 minutes long, two singers and a piano ensemble, and had its world premiere in Berlin.
Nice.
And Canadian premiere with McGill Opera. I think I definitely see classical music in general is a niche thing. If you think about it globally, very few people in the world listen to classical music, period. And then contemporary music is an even tinier niche within that niche. And I don't have a problem with it being niche. I think that's completely understandable. There's lots of really interesting things get done by humans that have a very small audience. For me, it's as long as there is a sustainable way of doing it for all the people who are involved, that's enough. So I wouldn't. For me, it's not about popular, not popular. It's sustainable, not sustainable.
Yeah.
Can everyone involved do it without killing themselves? Mm-hmm. And we're not quite figuring out that balance right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think, classical music has always relied on private patronage, private or church patronage, and so it's a luxury good. It's like luxury fashion, luxury cars, fine dining, that's where it lives, really. And I mean, one cool thing about music is that it can be reproduced many, many times. So it might be paid for originally as a luxury item, but then it can live out in the world, and people who don't buy Rolexes can enjoy it, right? So that's kind of really cool thing about music. But I ultimately don't have a problem with the fact that it relies on the patronage of people with money. I think that's okay, as long as you have a good relationship with these people where they actually respect you as an artist and allow you to do what you feel is important, and they're not just trying to get some imitation of something they love out of you. So I think it's about building the right kind of relationships, again, to make sure that it's sustainable. In my ideal world, I would find patrons who believe in what I'm doing and who get enjoyment out of that interaction. So, for example, the person with whom I organized the concert yesterday, Jonathan Krem and the Canzona Chamber Players, it's his own little music series. He's an amateur musician, high-level amateur musician. He loves hanging out with musicians. He loves playing music. So he organizes concerts at his house or at the smaller venues, and it gives him a chance to spend time with people he finds interesting and to listen to music he finds interesting. But, he makes his money elsewhere. So, I think it's people like that who are really the driving force behind what we do. Yeah, so how does my academic training, it's really interesting. I'm surprising myself now that I'm away from school. I'm seeing now all the ways that all the music I learned has entered into my creative bloodstream. Because I think while I was in school, I always had the sense that I had to resist a lot of those things, especially like really classical music. Like, I don't know, like the time period of Mozart is probably the least dear to me. And Baroque is pretty good, Romantic's pretty good, I really like Renaissance, it's amazing. But it's like a lot of the stuff, I feel like there was a stubborn resistance to it. Whereas now, especially now working with opera, I feel like I'm just like drawing on the full toolbox in order to drive the narrative and the energy. And I'm kind of surprised at how eclectic my music actually is. And it's never something I intended. I never identified myself as an eclectic composer. But when I listen to my operas especially, it's like, wow, it's like a hodgepodge. Everything's constantly shifting styles. And that surprised me. While I was studying, I really connected to the music of the Renaissance. And I think I later realized that it's a lot, the sound and the approach is a lot more similar to folk music, especially like Ukraine has a rich tradition of multi-voice singing, and some of it really sounds like Renaissance madrigals and that kind of repertoire. So for me, that music, before it like reached this kind of perfection of tonality, it was a little bit more grungy, a little more unpredictable, and I just like I love that sound. And so for me, it's now really natural to blend those two influences together, kind of earlier music and folk music. Yeah, there's like kind of two things that just in terms of like some short sentence that really stuck and that I keep coming back to. One of them was I was studying with Laurie Redford in Calgary, and I came into lesson and I was stressing out about not having enough time for a piece, and I said, I wish I had more time to work on this. And he said, well, if you had more time, you would have just written a different piece. So now it's like I have to remind myself of that. Just like having more time doesn't in and of itself make a better piece, it just makes a different piece. Though I do think, of course, there's limits. If you have too little time, then I think you produce something that's not thought through. So you still there still needs to be some minimum amount of time.
Yeah.
And the other one actually came from the only movie I know that deals directly with avant-garde music, like in a satire, a movie called Untitled.
I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's this kind of parallels between experimental contemporary art, experimental music, and at some point, the lead character is a very underappreciated experimental composer. He meets some famous composer who I forget who they were kind of trying to parody in that. There's some reviewers saying stupid things about the music, and the young composer turns to the older one and says like, how do you deal with this? How do you handle these people? And the older composer says, you have to learn to enjoy the process, not the outcome. So that, like, I keep coming back to that. It's like the results don't really matter if you're now not enjoying the process. Because how your music is received it's so unpredictable. It's so unpredictable whether it will have a life, whether it will resonate with people. Like, there's nothing you can do to control that. Like, you can try to write what you think sells, in our world, or what people will resonate to, but it doesn't mean that it will. So you have no control over the reception. The only thing you can control is your relationship to the creative process.
Yeah.
And you just have to find a way to make it enjoyable for yourself. And it's not going to be enjoyable constantly, but there needs to be like a net positive in there.
Meaningful, if not
Yes.
enjoyable all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
no one. It's not even enjoyable to enjoy yourself all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but some kind of meaning in there for sure. And if you don't have that, then the only thing that matters is the outcome, and that's kind of crazy.
And that's so beyond your control.
Yeah.
My advice would to maybe younger composers would be really do some soul searching and figure out why you're doing what you're doing, because music is a really tough field. It's tough. It's tough to make a kind of secure, comfortable living. So it should be something that you get enough meaning from that you will be willing to go through the grind of figuring out how to fund it. Like, the meaning should be big enough that it's worth it. If the meaning is not there, then the grind is pointless, and you don't need it, other people don't need it. Like, why are you doing it? There's easier ways to have a secure life, and you should just go and do that. Yeah, so my advice is, it's like, and there's a kind of balancing, I think, as you're going through school. You have to both be aware of the financial realities and be a little oblivious. Because if you're too aware of the financial realities, it can be impossible to go through the process. Because, like, it's not a practical field to begin with. It's not like the most practical choice of life. So if you're too aware of the impracticality of it, you just won't be able to develop as an artist. So you have to be a bit of an idealist and a little bit oblivious to say, like, I can see that this is really difficult, but somehow I'm special and I'll be able to surmount this. But then still be looking around being like, okay, how are people actually funding this? Like, what are they doing to make it work? So it's a kind of balancing act between, like, the practical awareness and this idealism and believing in your art. But yeah, ultimately it's like you have to have that meaning and idealism, because otherwise it's too hard to make the practical work, and it won't be enough to feed you both spiritually and physically.